Hi, everybody. I think let's get started. Um, and as folks trickle in, I'm just going to start with an introduction to the series and to ADOC and what we're going to talk about today. So my name is Ash. I use any pronouns. I'm a Chinese person with long black hair with blurred background. This meeting or this panel is going to be recorded and it's going to be uploaded on ADOC's YouTube page. So if you'd like, you can share this with your friends after the fact. But really quickly, this is the second panel in our Impact Speaker series. We are organizing the series to share to ask these questions about impact with ADOC and the larger community beyond ADOC. Questions such as how do we redefine impact? What can impact look like through a lens of cultural strategy, political education, and the various ways documentary film / storytelling can inspire and catalyze change. We are trying to provide a shared understanding and analysis for how film and storytelling can support and create social change for our communities. This Impact Speaker Series is a part of ADOC's Impact Initiative that builds up the work of the ADOC Haverford Impact Lab, Cecilia Mejia's work as Impact Director, and the upcoming Impact Fellowship that we will share more about soon. The Impact Working Group includes myself, Ash, and project leads PJ Raval and Gary Leonard. So today we're gonna have a panel about youth and grassroots organizing. I'm gonna introduce Kalani, who's gonna be our moderator today. Kalani is an Ottawa and Asian American artist, activist, and tattooer based in New York City. She works with a range of mediums, including acrylic, photography, and digital painting. Kalani grew up a military brat, seeing a lot of the US before moving to New York to study animation at the School of Visual Arts, where she currently runs the school's Indigenous Student Union and Community Fridge. In 2019, she started a tattoo apprenticeship and has been tattooing since. Inspired by the many places she's been and people she's met along the way, her work is a creative but observant take on these subjects. Hi, Kalani.
Hi, thanks so much for that introduction. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Kalani. Yes. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm gonna be your moderator. Yes. So let me introduce your two lovely panelists. First we have Bawin Suchet. Bawin is an educator and filmmaker, the co-founder and co-executive director of Youth FX, an organization that focuses on empowering young people of color through film. He is also the co-director of Next Doc, a fellowship program that aims to amplify the voices of emerging filmmakers. Bawin is a director, cinematographer, and editor of Out of the Muck, a feature-length documentary supported by ITVS, Sundance, Just Films, Black Public Media, and Southern Documentary Fund, which aired on PBS's Independent Lens series. He previously directed and edited The Throwaways and Free to Learn. Bawin is also a 2019 Just Films Rockwood Fellow, 2019 Sundance DFP Fellow, an advisor at the 2023 Sundance Edit and Story Lab, a member of ADOC, and a member of the Documentary Accountability Working Group. Hi, how you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me on the panel. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And also we have Jessica Jin. Jessica is an activist, artist, technologist, and Texan. It's like my four favorite things. Bursting onto the political world stage with a dick joke gone wrong, she is the subject of Come and Take It, a documentary short by Ellen Spiro and PJ Raval about leading Cox Not Glocks, the largest anti-gun protest in Texas history. Jessica has been featured in The Daily Show, BBC World Service, MSNBC, The New York Times, Cosmopolitan, and Time, among others. She has since rolled up her sleeves on 2 congressional campaigns, a presidential campaign, serves on the board of Move Texas Civic Fund, created a TikTok that made Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff mad, and sometimes writes speeches for international dignitaries. Now based in New York, Jessica works on the product team of a startup working to make Medicare and retirement less terrible for senior citizens to navigate. Hi, Jessica.
Excited to chat today.
Yeah. All right. So before we get started, in classic Adawe activist fashion, I would just like to take a few seconds to do a land acknowledgement. Also, first off, my name is Kalani. I should reintroduce myself. My name is Kalani, but my name is also Kishka Kwa, and I'm from the Adawe tribe of Oklahoma. We gather here on Canarsie and Lenape land, which is known as Manhattan and Brooklyn, or wherever viewers are listening in from, to talk about youth and grassroots organizing and to celebrate some of these amazing panelists we have today. Let's have a good talk. Amen. And if you guys would like to know more about the land that you stand on, check out native-land.ca. It's just a virtual interactive map that shows you all of the tribes and land that you stand on. So how are you guys doing today?
Thriving.
I'm doing good. Yeah.
Love to hear that.
This is
Okay.
great. Yeah.
It be like that. Okay. First off, thanks for joining. Would you guys like to talk about your experience either organizing as a young person or organizing with young people, or why is it important to you to work with youth?
Yeah, obviously I'm not a young person. At one point I was, back in the day. But one of the things that's honestly been really incredible to see as part of the kind of growth of Youth FX. So Youth FX started in 2008, and one of the things that I wanted to do was started as a 4-week summer program teaching young people filmmaking in the community where I was living, which is the south end of Albany, which is a very under-resourced community that has, a ton of really incredibly talented young people that I was working with because I was teaching at a middle school and working in a summer program. And one of the things at the time I was starting to kind of do filmmaking and self-taught and not really, thinking about it as like a formal practice, but as a way to build community and for young people to kind of get their voices out. So this is 2008, way, way back, a long time ago. There was no YouTube really. I think YouTube had started, but it wasn't like, kind of like prominent yet. And so one of the things that was really important for me was to build and co-create the program with the young people I was working with. So I had it was funny because we did like an open house when we first started the program, and I was very excited. I had food and we were like drinks, and I was like, oh, the people are going to come and who want to join the summer program. And the only people that showed up were the 3 young people I already knew I worked with. 2 of them were my students, and one of them was working at an after school program that my partner was running. And so I was like, all right, cool. You guys are here. Let's organize and sit down together and think about the type of program that you want to create, because I had a very kind of emergent kind of process in how I would like to teach. I was working at a free school, which is kind of like a liberatory like radical anarchist school. And so I was kind of used to allowing young people to kind of dictate what they wanted to do and how they wanted to learn. And so I kind of just applied that process. And honestly, what came out of it was just an incredible amount of connectivity and buy-in and ownership from the young people. So I think like the thing that I've really learned, and this is kind of extended, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later on, but extended into the work we do now, but is that I think the one thing that we need to do as folks who have the ability and the privilege to work with young people is to give them space and to trust them and to create, structures that in a way kind of create a level of like safety around them, so they're not kind of interfered with or told what to have to do, but create space for them to decide and kind of co-create things that they want to see happening around them in their world, whether it's programs or whether it's like, making political change or organizing. So I think this high level of trust, and I think that, we live in a time when young people are really demonized, and I think that they're scapegoated for things that are going on in the culture that is not a result of their actions, but a result of actions of people, in our age group and older. And I think it's important for us to allow them the space to kind of voice their frustration and their anger about those things, and then to create ways for them to really kind of like channel that into organizing and activate them in different ways. So I think for me, my kind of space to allow activation to happen was making films and telling stories. And so I think that is something that I've carried from the beginning that little bit of trust, which is like, hey, let's talk about what you want to do, grew into this thing. And actually, all three of the young people I was organizing with back then, which is 16 years ago now, program's been 16 years. One of them is my co-executive director, Darian Henry, who's amazing. Shout out to her. And then the other one is our technical director, Rashid Howell. And then the third person, Majestic Tillman, is a local actor, writer, and director that we still work with and support his project. So, I think just having trust is really important.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like that's usually how it starts. You kind of just like grab people and you're like, you,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
making me. At least that's how I do it. And you, Jessica?
I would say that through my experience organizing as a youth, and organizing with people younger than me, and now like sitting on the board and watching young people still continue to find ways to organize sustainably, young people get away with a lot more. We can, we can ask for forgiveness over permission. We also have to like fight for forgiveness and permission amongst each other. I think we can be our own harshest critics. And the world has like a bunch of expectations that they put on us, right? Like there's like older folks that are like, oh, well, we dug ourselves into this hole, but the young people, the young climate activists will get us out. And so there's lots of big conversations we have to have around what does sustainable youth organizing look like? I've noticed through electoral organizing that there's like, when there's like big like Lord of the Rings battle scenes where there's like waves of people running towards their enemy and like the front lines are constantly getting blasted out. I feel like that's what a lot of people see youth as in organizing spaces, as that like fast burnout front line, like really enthusiastic, charging a million miles an hour, and they see us as disposable. And so what I'm watching folks do at Move Texas, which Alex Burnell, the advocacy director at Move, is here on this call, is look for ways to sustainably organize youth, to direct them, to guide them, to help them feel like they have a political home, and to help them feel like they have permission to learn and to be wrong and to work in a community that will support them as they evolve as activists, as they evolve in their community, as they deepen their relationship with what their work is in this world.
Absolutely. I feel like something that I've learned working with children specifically, I used to work at a before and after school daycare program when I was still in high school, is that I feel like kids or younger people, I feel like their minds aren't held by any boundaries. There's no rules, there's no like society pressure up in there, and they come up with the most like creative things. But that does lead me into my next question. So Jessica, I know that you were talking about kind of the world seeing kids or youth organizers specifically as just kind of this conglomerate. And I know that we often hear from filmmakers, but not specifically maybe like youth organizers like yourself. I was just wondering if you could talk about your experience being the protagonist and not, just a conglomerate in your film Come and Take It, and how that affected or influenced your work with Cox Nut Glocks.
It's so interesting, right? Because I learned to organize on the fly. I cracked a dick joke on the internet. It went viral. I was like, what do you like? Everyone's calling me like a prominent gun control activist. And I'm like, what do you mean? I just thought my dick joke was funny. Let me give me a second. I'll like gather all of my thoughts. I'll put forward a thoughtful political statement that no one can attack me for. That doesn't exist. And I had to learn on the fly. There was a bunch of stuff that I did wrong. Like an organizer needs to be collecting contact info. We had a little sign up sheet, lost it within like 2 weeks. Like there's just a bunch of stuff that you have to learn on the fly. And like with cameras right there, I think I was too just caught up in all the action that I couldn't even be that conscious of a film subject. I was just like, oh, you want to tag along to this? Amazing, PJ. I'm going to be like half asleep and kind of going on zombie autopilot, and you're just going to witness the raw whatever. I remember when PJ was showing me an early cut of Come and Take It. I was like, wow, this is really joyful. But I know you have like 10,000 hours of footage of me crying and like snot coming out of my nose. And like there's like a very like personal experience of like being in it and just being like vaguely aware of the way that the world's interacting with you. And like I think having a camera around just helps you put into perspective that actually like when things feel hard and when there when it feels really blurry about like what you're doing and why, and like, why am I doing this again? I'm getting death threats from white supremacists. Like, what is this all for? It's fun because you can tell yourself, oh, this is part of my hero's journey, but it's also plugging into like a bigger story that people care about. And there's like, there's a piece of this that matters in the bigger narrative of what young people are doing. And I need to like not be so dismissive of my own experience, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like now that you've been doing this for a while, if you were to like look back on your younger self when you were doing that, which is like this like nationwide movement that started out of a dick joke, what do you think now, you know?
I think that like the pressure felt really high then, but now looking back, I would just be kinder to myself. I would be like, you're learning, you're gonna mess up. People are going to have a million expectations for you because there's people who have come before you have been working on this for longer. There are people who are impacted by gun violence where this is a really, really personal issue for them. And you cannot do it right a million. Like there are times even years after we threw the initial protest where I was like, dang, I probably shouldn't have had everybody stand out in 40, like 100-degree heat for like 2 hours listening to professors opine on gun policy. Like that's probably not the move to like build like a lasting organization. But it's just like, your political involvement, if you stay committed and you stay clear-eyed, is a long arc. It's not just like the one pizzazzy thing that you do when you're 25. It's like going to be a lifetime commitment, and you start somewhere, and that somewhere can be messy, and it's allowed to be messy. And just be kind to yourself because it's a long road.
I'm gonna start crying. I needed to hear that. Um, Bawin, I know you're not a youth organizer now yourself, but you do work with youth. And so going off what Jessica said, is there anything that you've learned from youth that you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I've learned, I mean, a ton. I continue to learn stuff from young people. And I think that's really one of the most incredible parts about being an educator and a mentor. If you're really open to that, is like, there's really, reciprocal relationship where you're teaching and you're learning as well. And if you're open to that, I think it can be extremely, enriching and empowering in, both ways. And I think just to kind of like, jump off to some of the things that you were saying, Jessica, like, I feel like that's one of the things that's lacking in the education system. And I think so many, it's like young people spend the majority of their developing time as young people, like growing into adulthood in schools, in these institutional settings that do not allow them the freedom to make mistakes, to experiment, to try something, to take risks. And I think that that's why, in my opinion, you have, young folks who are kind of prone to doing things outside of those settings or even inside those settings that can be to their own detriment, rather than creating spaces or opportunities for young people to take risks, to learn, to experiment, and to make mistakes and know that that's a part of life. I feel like when you are operating in a hierarchical system like the education system, which is all about like kind of like being better than other people, like you miss out on this huge opportunity to sort of build with each other and see each other as collaborators and conspirators in working towards goals that you want to achieve, whether that's in organizing, whether that's in sports or theater or all these different realms, which is why I think filmmaking is such a perfect space for that, because making a film requires a lot of collaboration. And I think that we always kind of say like Youth FX was really created as an excuse to build community and create this space where there's like, yes, we're making a film, but really what we're doing is giving young people the chance to be in authentic relationship with each other, and also realize that they can determine and kind of like have a say in their future and what they're kind of going to create, even if it's like, for example, our 6-week summer intensive, which is for high school students. It's like so many of them, it's like the first thing we do is just spend a lot of time building the community and allowing them to just like let their shoulders down from spending 8 to 9 months or whatever it might be in a school setting where they can't be authentic and be themselves, and they have to worry about like how they look, how they dress, like saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. And I think that people underestimate that part of the process of working with youth, and I've learned that those kinds of things are so critical to them. And I think we've always built that time, even just like for rest, because you're so right about burning out young people. It's like, yeah, these young people, like send them to the front lines. I think that's so much energy. But then you are surprised when they're just like, actually, fuck this. I don't want to do this work anymore. And it's like, why are we burning through that energy rather than sort of nurturing it and really cultivating like a way for young people to have the opportunity to be on the front lines of things if they want to, but then also to take breaks and rest, you know, and have fun and bring joy into organizing. Because those things are so critically important, you know. And I've learned, you know, I was doing a lot of organizing work when I was younger myself, and I feel like it's like burnout is a part of it. You're like expected to kind of like fizzle out, and then it's like, well, that's we did that too. And I think like I'm trying to be really conscious of not passing down these kind of habitual things that I sort of internalize that are thought to be the way you organize, but actually are extremely toxic. Which is why I think there's, you know, kind of a challenge right now happening where it is really hard to kind of get people mobilized, you know, and take action in a way that's really effective because people see it as, you know, something that doesn't kind of like pay off at the end, you know. And so I think it's important for us to also celebrate those smaller victories and celebrate the small kind of, you know, wins that we do get as folks who are working with youth or with young people, and really uplift them and amplify, you know. Like I'm always like hyping up the young people I work with, and some of them are like, oh, you stop, you're just gassing us up, this and that. And I was like, no, but it's important to celebrate these little things, you know, and see them as like these micro victories are building to this like larger, you know, kind of like push that we can be making as a society, as a culture. And I think youth are always going to be at the forefront of social change because it's a mindset that they have that's really like comes out of a sense of audacity that they can change the world. And you know what I mean? And that's, we shouldn't be squelching that, you know what I'm saying? We should be cultivating that.
Absolutely. I do have the audacity to change the world, huh?
Yeah, hell yeah. You are changing the world, you know what I'm saying? For real.
I definitely think that, as an animator, especially, I have this appreciation for moving pictures, but I think storytelling is incredibly powerful. And especially as a Native Americans, not storytelling, but like verbal pass, like that's how we pass down our histories, is through, verbal communication and storytelling, and yes, even art or pictures. Um, but enough about the youth. I was wondering if you guys could tell me more about the role of storytelling in your guys' work.
You know, the gun violence conversation is kind of was kind of stale for a little bit. If you were to talk about guns, you know exactly what the other person's going to say. You know exactly what most people are going to say. You know, kind of like where people come to a stalemate. And I think the reason why Cox Not Glocks broke out was because it took in a completely sideways angle. It wasn't immediately like, no, say no to guns, guns are terrible. It was just kind of like, isn't it kind of funny that you can openly carry a rifle anywhere in Texas, but you can't carry a dildo anywhere? Like you'd get in trouble. And it wasn't like that was the reason why Cox Not Glocks broke out, because it's a class B misdemeanor to carry a phallic object around in Texas, but you can carry a loaded gun around with no license, and you could just, roam around society. So the angle was like, look, Texans are afraid of sexuality, but they're not afraid of just the daily expectation of violence. It's just normalized. And the fact that that was a story, that was an angle, that was like a hook that really like made people take a second glance at their values. I think that's what helped it break through the typical like blah blah, you know what we're going to say, you know what our values are, kind of conversation that you normally have around that. So ever since then I've been like, okay, I'm really into a good hook, I'm really into a good scheme, I'm really into a good story. And so when January 6th broke out, I was like, I was noticing all this furniture being smashed. It was like all these people are bursting into Congress and like smashing all this wooden furniture. Actually, I'm pretty sure that furniture is made by like prison labor because of federal law. So I went around and like dug into all these law books, and I was like, I made a quick TikTok, and I was like, all that furniture that's being smashed, by the way, is being replaced by prison labor. And that's why Nancy Pelosi's like chief of staff got mad. He was like, no, it's not, but then he didn't actually prove me wrong. There's always an angle, there's always a hook, there's always like a fresh way that you can just kind of like cut through a stale story that'll make people remember what matters and reevaluate their values. And that's my favorite thing to do. So I feel like a little like angle truffle pig constantly. I'm just scheming at all times about like, how can I like add a fresh take to this story to like remind people that it's not just something that like they've dismissed because they can't get any further on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that, you know, I think that, I think like, you know, storytelling is really a form of creating culture, you know what I mean? And I think that one of the things that I think is so challenging for for young people today is that they're being told constantly who they are and what they are through like the the sort of mainstream media. And I think so much of it is literally just marketing and trying to sell shit. And I think that what we try to do at Youth FX is allow them the space to really kind of get to the core of the things that they want to be talking about, the stories that they want to tell, and inherently they intersect with really critical, important social issues that are happening in their lives and the lives around them. And honestly, like super hyper localized issues too, because I think that there's the kind of like the national issues that are happening and people are kind of impacted them. But I think what I've noticed is that so many of the high school students that we work with, it's like they're so tuned into like literally things that are going on like in their school buildings, in their neighborhoods, and they want to use film as a way to kind of talk about those things, to critique them, to build new ways of thinking about those things. And at Youth FX, we do narrative films and we do documentaries, and then we do all sorts of space, all the kinds of things in between, photography, experimental videos, music videos, and things like that. And I feel like all of that is kind of like just building culture and it's really coming from their perspectives and their minds. And so what I think happens is when you're able to do that, all of a sudden you have this whole different level of agency in what's going on around you. You feel like you can actually have a say and have an impact. And I think, like I love so many different things that are happening as far as like, people kind of uncovering stuff that's going on in their communities that other people aren't talking about, because it's like their perspective is not the perspective of the kind of mainstream media or the propaganda that's coming through a lot of different, kind of political channels and things like that. Because, Albany's a very political town. Our city is the capital of New York. Surprised if nobody knew that, but a lot of people don't know that. But it's like, yeah, so yeah, it's like, but really, and they don't I think that's the thing is like people underestimate. And you said someone, I think you mentioned you were from Austin, so like Austin's a capital city as well. And there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes in capital cities that are not kind of like present and visible to people. And so we try to educate people about the young people about the systems that are at play, but they're the ones who are really kind of navigating through how they experience it on the ground level. Like you talk about things like gun violence, and it's like a different conversation in Parkland, Florida, than it is in the city of Albany, where you have a different level of gun violence that's happening, that's impacting them as powerfully, creating all sorts of like PTSD and trauma around those things, and also being perpetuated by the systems of kind of policing and racism that's going on in their community. So they witness all that shit, and they want to use storytelling as a tool, because storytelling can be a way to kind of break through some of the chatter. And then they're actually speaking to each other, because the beautiful thing that is built into our program that's so critical is showing the films and screening them. So we take them out into high schools and middle schools and have the young people be the ones kind of presenting the films and having conversations about them, so that they're leading what is going to be kind of like talked about after a film. So they're helping to kind of kind of do this peer learning and education of each other through the filmmaking and through the stories that they're telling.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like specifically when I worked with kids too, I feel like, children and youth, they are almost, it's like a mirror for all the shit that we don't want to see, or like don't want to confront or need to fix within ourselves. And that just comes from someone who is like taking care of children. I was like, oh, okay, actually, but that
And
does,
it's unfiltered. Like
it is.
you can't escape it, because it's no bullshit, And I think that's why it's like I think it's so important to cultivate those types of spaces where they can have the freedom to think and express themselves. Because I think what happens as you get older is you learn to censor yourself, and I think people become performative around having deep conversations around those kinds of issues. And I think that's why I say it's really important to allow young people to tell their stories when they're young, because it's like literally your brain is reshaping and changing up till like whatever, like the age of like 27. So it's like, don't wait. Like that's why, Next Doc is so important too. It's like, we want to give access to young filmmakers so that they can be the ones driving the stories, because their mindset will change, and I think it's like catch you when you have, like you said, that no bullshit filter, and your, the audacity and the kind of like fire that you have as a young person, that you should be given access at that stage of your life to be able to get your voice and your stories told.
Absolutely. And maybe if we could just flip it around, Jessica, I know I asked you earlier to retrospectively look at yourself, but I feel like, is there anything that maybe you've taken with you from youth organizing, or that you've maybe don't have anymore as like, you know, you've progressed as an activist and a filmmaker? I don't know.
I think that like because it all happened by accident for me, and I'm just like, I think I'm a very type A, very like first oldest daughter of an immigrant kind of mindset where I think everything through. I'll stop myself before I even start because I'll be like, I can already foresee 17,000 different consequences of beginning this and like the complications. I don't need that in my life.
On
But the
trauma.
fact that I I like yeeted myself into activism with a dick joke and like couldn't like it was snowballed so hard and I lived through it. I had an incredible adventure and I like made so many mistakes, made so many people mad and disappointed myself and like fucked up in a number of ways. And but now it's like a constant reminder to myself when I feel myself like I'm like 32 now. As I'm like getting older and I'm feeling myself like looking for more stability or like tiptoeing my way towards the kind of person who's like, oh yeah, I used to be young and enthusiastic and I used to have lots of energy for stuff. I'm like, don't be that person. Like, be the kind of person that snowballs themselves down the side of a mountain by like just throwing spaghetti at a wall. You're resilient, you will adapt, you will continually change. You have to continue to be brave because you cannot peak at being dildo girl. Like, that cannot be your last act.
Can you
You
change
know,
your
like
name to Dildo Girl now?
oh my god, that cannot be who I am. Like I can't be die. Like this is why I must drive with my seatbelt on. I cannot die having dildo girl be my like last loud act. Like I need to like stay in that spirit of like just not knowing and fucking around and absolutely finding out, you know?
Absolutely. Finding out. Yeah, I definitely feel like as a youth organizer, granted I'm only 22, I've only been doing this for so long, and I definitely see myself progressing along with my art career into more proactive ways in the maybe corporate spaces I step into or whatever space I do step into. But I think I like think back to when I first moved back to New York and I was really introduced to the New York activist scene here. And I just remember like the awe at all of the people, specifically all of the young, amazing activists that I've met. And I'm like, let's keep that energy. Well, I know there's like this like saying or something on the internet where it's like if your younger self could see you now, they'd be like, damn, you know, my younger self would be like, shit, you're all tattooed and stuff. But like I like look at my younger self when I was like starting to do this stuff and I'm like, I want to be her. I mean, I am, but like I do want to, you know, balls to the wall, go at it. But
There is that conversation about letting younger you point the finger, right? You like reach back to your inner child and you're like, what would you do? What would you want? What would you think is so cool? And now that you're older and you have more skills, more judgment, more resources, you can be like, I will drive the car. Like you point the finger and I will drive the car. And it's such a delightful exercise to do for yourself. But then, you know, there's the whole wrestling of like, what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to create? Like, why do you even share? Like, what's the goal in sharing? Blah blah. Like that whole artist existential thing that you have to battle with throughout your life, no matter what.
That's actually really funny that you say that. I really like that like metaphor. I'm gonna show this recording to my mom afterwards after she's out of work. And she's gonna laugh because older me can't drive. So I think younger would be like point and we'll walk. Um, anyways, on to the next thing. I wanted to delve more into your guys's identities and you know, connecting your identity, connecting the Asian American identity to your art. Things like why is AAPI representation important to you in your works or, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, so my family is, you know, South Asian. You know, my mother was actually from India, and my father was actually born in East Africa. And so I was born in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and moved here when I was 10 to the US. And I think the thing that's so interesting when I think about like the stories I'm telling, for example, are not about me and my identity and my family. I do have a film that I will make at some point in my life about that because I'm really interested in exploring the Indian diaspora in East Africa, which is really big and large, and also the kind of the racism that exists between Indians and Africans in that part of the world. And I think it's really important for me to think about solidarity and thinking about how we're building across different racial and ethnic identities. And so one of the things that, one of my favorite projects that we did at Youth FX was a collaboration with our local high school. It's called Which Way Is Home, and it came out of this really kind of like standing rivalry between students who are refugees from Southeast Asia, Burma, Myanmar, and places like that, that they were coming here and actually getting into conflict with a lot of the Black students at Albany High School. And so we were asked to do this project with students because we had been working with refugee students who were from Southeast Asia and working with Black students together in programs. And they were like, how do you guys do that? And I think part of what, again, it was is like we were out of the context of a school environment, which I think just creates this sort of like kind of like tightness and stress around just being in a building like that and being kind of like surveillance and controlled. And for me, it really is something that I'm constantly thinking about, is like, what is my role as an Asian filmmaker, a South Asian filmmaker? Because I think it's important for me to not just kind of feel that I have to tell those South Asian stories, but I think for me it's about how am I being reflective and being critical in some ways of the history of where I come from and our relationship to other ethnicities and other racial groups, because I think that's one thing I'm super really just big on, because I think that's how we're going to really find liberation for all of us, because I think we know that the enemy of the sort of like structures of white supremacy, we know the enemy of the structures of racial capitalism. And so for us to sit here and just focus solely on our own identities, which is, again, not to knock people that are doing that. I think it's extremely important work to be sharing your story. I think all of us, as folks who have come from colonized, countries and colonized histories that have been stolen from us, we have to tell our stories because it's a form of reclamation, and it's also a form of passing that story down to generations after us. So I think it's super critical to do that. My work at this particular time is trying to figure out how we can build solidarity amongst disparate groups of people of color who have all been marginalized and oppressed in their own ways, and that this isn't about trying to find hierarchies, but it's trying to get to a place where we understand that there is a common sort of like goal that we can work towards together. But that's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take understanding that there is some harm there involved. And so one of the other things we do is we bring a lot of mental health professionals and social workers into those kinds of programs. So it's not just us as artists, which is, we have our role, but we're not experts in those kinds of things. And we know that if we're going to get into a project that is going to uncover and have young people be honest and authentic about the things that have harmed them or the pain that they've endured or trauma, we have to have people there who are going to be able to hold that space aside from us. And so we did this really beautiful project, and it was called Which Way Is Home, because it was this idea that even if you are living in a country that you put, quote unquote, is where you were born or is your home, it still doesn't feel like home because you're dealing with these structures of oppression. And then also addressing what it means to be a refugee in a community. We have a very high population of refugees in the city of Albany. It's like known as a sanctuary city. So how do we actually welcoming people and understanding their stories and seeing that we can share? Because what we were experiencing was that there was a lot of misunderstandings. People didn't know people's stories. And I think, again, that goes back to how storytelling is really a form of culture creation, reclamation, and preservation. So it's like, if we're doing that work with young people, how are we giving them space to also kind of address things that they don't understand in a way that doesn't make them feel like, oh, you're stupid, or how did you not know that that's where this is, or that's where this country is, or that this is happening to certain people, and vice versa, people who are newcomers to this country, to understand the dynamics that exist here and the history here and why people have reactions when they feel like somebody is getting access to resources that they've been fighting for their entire lives and have never gotten. So I think it was really a matter of us kind of pulling apart those strands. And as a matter of fact, that project, which was supposed to take place over one school year, ended up extending because we also did that too. We took time and we understood that if we're going to get into this, it's not about the product at the end, the piece that we did, which was an incredible piece, but it was about the process. Like, that was really what it was about. And I think, again, just going back to how storytelling can be this really incredible space, because it's not just about the end story, the result, the like film you made, but it's about the process you get to actually, that journey on that path of telling that story. That to me is really where a lot of the richness and the kind of like solidarity building can happen. So that's really, kind of how, I mean, I don't know if I addressed the question, but I think it's like, how I think about the question of identity is that I don't necessarily see it as just like solely about me, but it's like how am I trying to be some, kind of like synergize my who I am as a person and kind of understand and grow and kind of like learn from other people as well to build ultimately again building like solidarity amongst different groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like as someone who also comes from immigrants, also comes from First Nations peoples, has a very like multiracial background.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it's like
Yeah.
it's all I've been there, but I think it helps me also like appreciate other people more. Not that I need to be like multiracial to do that, but like it's beautiful, and celebrating other people is definitely like can be a part of your identity. I think that's like also important. But yeah, what about you, Jessica? Sorry, babe, you're on mute.
Oops, thanks for telling me. I didn't anticipate that when you start talking about sexuality in America that you like punch a hornet's nest, especially as an East Asian woman in America, where there's so much loaded shit with like from like occupied Asian countries, from like wartime bullshit, from like colonial. Ugh, it's terrible, and especially the nest that I punched was like a white man's gun owning hornet's nest crossed with like all of the sexuality stuff, and the way that people thought that they could talk to me, the way that people thought that they could like stereotype me or thought that they could treat me, I think was not unrelated to being East Asian. I think it's like it's very clear where that comes from. um so it's like, oh, you walk straight in. I felt like I walked straight into a wall like running into that. And then there's like, the stereotypes of us, like the most annoying versions of the East Asians, like being like technocratic, like teacher's pet type loud politicians out there who are trying to win the favor of Republican types. And it's just like, why is it that some of the most annoying ones of us are the ones that are like setting the tone for who we are, like leading the anti-affirmative action crap, like all of this stuff. Like there's like a type A precociousness that like gets people very far and makes us very annoying. And I think there's like room for people like me to go out there and be like a bumbling kind of like joyful person who's just like, I'm out here, I'm being 100% who I am, and I don't think you can put me in a box. Like, you're trying and it's making you look really goofy because I'm not like, I'm we're breaking stereotypes over here by being exactly who we want to be and saying what we think and dealing with the consequences of it. And like, hornet's nest or not, we're having a blast,
You said cock in hand, strap in hand. Running on the street. I definitely like even okay, tea time. Even within like something that I've experienced in the New York activist scene is that I feel like we all kind of already knew this, but the Asian community is pretty divided. But even within the activist community here, the Asian American activist community here, the call is coming from fucking inside the house. And more times than not, it's like we struggle so much with this model minority stereotype and having to grapple with that and having to kind of like outgrow that and just get rid of it all. But something that I've learned is that it's always like some of the most amazing people and organizers that I have met in the New York activist scene here have been Asian femmes and queer Asians, and some of these Asian men be running their mouth. It annoys the fuck out of me. But it's just honestly so incredible just to be able to just like, I don't know, have your voice out there, really lead your community. And this also brings me into my next question, maybe Jessica, if you want to elaborate more on this, about the importance of taking up space, whether it's the activist work that you do, the job work that you do, your art. You want to elaborate on that?
If y'all also got into the artist way during the pandemic and started asking yourselves what you make art for, who you make it for, why you share it, and had a little mini crisis about it. Kalani, I see you. It's really interesting because it's like, you know, the most authentic expression of yourself is you like you digging in and being like, what is true to me? And then asking yourself why it's important to share it. And taking up space like means, well, you know, a lot of times in order to create the art, you have to be like, I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it for me. I'm just doing it for me. I'm doing it for no one else. I'm doing it because I believe in it. But then like you have this thing that you made, and the whole point of art is sharing it with people. And then like you take that entire thing that you like planted in your head in order to birth the work, and then you have to like toss that out the window and be like, actually I created it to share with other people. It's almost like you have to like gaslight yourself into like sharing. And I think that's the hardest work that I still have to do is like, I have so many ideas. I have so many things that are in the works. I have so many things in progress. I have so many big dreams about what I want to create with the one unique me, according to the artist way, that's available on this planet. And just knowing that like, what if you create it, it's worth sharing. If no one sees it, it doesn't matter. It's like, doesn't, if, you know, like it doesn't mean you failed. It just means that no one saw it. And also it means you can go back to the drawing board. It's just giving yourself permission to make, to iterate, to like fall on your face, to put something out there that totally bombs, that like falls flat, that no one cares about. It just means it just gives you that just gives you feedback to go back to the drawing board and try again. I want to like emphasize that it's important to create for creating's sake. And that like it doesn't have to be totally results driven. It doesn't have to be like in tech work every day where like here is the click funnel, here's how many people saw it, here's how many people engage with it, here's how many people did this thing and did that, and we're trying to like perfect our little funnel to get people to a goal. That's not what art is like. I think that just like, you know, true expression actually has a lot of power, and I've seen it just by being like a younger artist who was just flailing about until something stuck, you know? And I want to just remind everybody that that's important energy and that's precious energy. And you have to like remind yourself that it's okay. I think like, you know, Talks on Clocks being like a big boom, I'm just like, what if the next thing fails? That's going to be even more embarrassing because the last thing worked, you know? Like there's that kind of dynamic that you just have to let go of because the world is big. The world is big and time is long, you know?
Absolutely. So I've been hearing that like a reoccurring theme in this conversation is obviously youth organizing, but also burnout. I've been hearing a lot of like, we are so burnt out as activists. So maybe Bawin, if you want to talk about this more, because I know you were talking about this earlier with youth organizing or even yourself. How do you take up space, or how do you care for yourself through this like very rigorous and demanding work? It is like hard leading a group of people, let alone like youth organizing. I'm
Yeah.
flailing. I don't even know what I'm doing, let alone the the other college students I'm working with.
Yeah. You know, I think that again, it's like really prioritizing space and time and not having things that are really driven by deadlines. I mean, I don't know, it's like I feel like there's times when I think we're very casual about even like completion of projects. And like you were just saying, Jessica, it's like I want to respect and value the process of making something, not even the completion of it. And like my letting go of that, I've witnessed like young people, it's like they sometimes they don't care about finishing something. And that's not out of a lack of like not caring about the work, but as an understanding that they've done a lot of the work. And then it's like, okay, this is like sort of like a deliverable that we're kind of expecting just in like the terms of like, you know, a final cut or something like that. It's like you know, you're working through a project, and I found that a lot of people, you know, that we work with, it's like they would, in a way, they're extending the project unintentionally as a way to for them to just continue to work on something and not have it be only done when only like completed when it's like this final cut. It's like they want the act of actually making to continue. And then, you know, so then part of the other aspect of this is like this idea of space and in the context of like rest and a place to be that you can just go and hang out. And I think we're really so thankfully, you know, in 2018 we were able to get a space that was very low rent. You know, Albany doesn't have crazy rents like a lot of major cities, but we were actually given a really low rental space through Albany Housing Authority. excuse me, and it was right in the community that we had founded the organization, even though we're fully, we work with young people all over the capital region, Albany, Schenectady, Detroit, and nationally. The space that we have now is really in the neighborhood where the program started, and it was really important for us to be there because it's about access. And I think that, a really great example of that is, the pandemic had happened and we had to close down and go virtual. And I think one of the things that the students that we were working with were really missing was just being in community and in space together. And I have to say, I think that was part of why the uprisings around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor that happened in the summer of 2020 was part of like people wanting to just kind of be together in space. And then what we did is we really just opened our space up for young people. We actually provided cameras for people who wanted to do media and be on the streets. And I think part of what we had to do in addition to that is also create space for them to like rest and recover from that, and so we would have like food and cookouts and like and then as we came back into person, we built that kind of care into our organization. And we actually brought on a social worker and a professor who I had known for years, who brought this whole trauma informed framework to our organization, because we also realized once we got back in person, students were really hurting. There was a lot of like unattended, things that happened to them that weren't ever talked about. Young people who had lost people, or suicide rates were really high, and ideation and things like that. It's like people cutting. Like there was all these things that started to kind of become way more visible because the pandemic. For that kind of moment, people were being thoughtful about each other, and I think that when that kind of like in a way dissipated, I feel like a lot of young people were like, well, what happened to that? And so we tried to respond to that by bringing on, someone to help us develop a framework. Again, we're artists, we're not mental health professionals. And while art is definitely therapeutic and a space for us to heal, we are not, professionals at that work. And so we wanted to bring someone in that could help us be essentially like frontline responders to that when we hear about those things or the students are bringing that to us. But also like, what do we do after that? And part of that was like taking young people out into like nature, and like we built in like the program where we would take kids out for hikes, and we would just like rent like vans, and we would go out in these, because we have a lot of beautiful land around us. As I was saying earlier, it's like like in the fall it's really beautiful. And so taking people outside, like just going, having fun, like having evenings where it's just an open mic, or it's like a karaoke night, like not having everything that we do programmatically be about making or even art making, but just about having fun and hanging out. And we always have food. Like food is like a really important thing to have, in any youth space, in my opinion. And then access to things like, like any sort of like, like healthcare products, or like, toothpaste, toothbrushes, backpack, like just basic stuff that people might need. We just have like a whole like closet in our space that's like anybody can go in at any point and get that. So it's like these really kind of simple things that I think a lot of youth spaces overlook, that I think are about showing young people that you care about them beyond the work that you're sort of like there to do, but that you care about them as people, and I think we would love that to sort of be modeled to other youth organizations in our community. So we're kind of developing kind of like a handbook, or almost like, like a booklet, so people can see the path that we went through to get to that place and say, hey, we think, people should be thinking about this, because I think, again, that they're not getting that. A lot of young folks aren't getting that. Definitely not in school. Some of them not even in their own families. And I think how, as a youth space that you're bringing young people into, are you also thinking about their well-being deeper than just the work you're supposed to be doing with them as a film space, or a, sports team or theater program, whatever it may be? How are we also thinking about them, as humans? And like their needs are very kind of like important. And like you said, Jesse, it goes back to the top of the conversation, like so that they're not just kind of like burned out, you know what I mean? And kind of like in a way feel used up by people who are kind of like leading, even like things like, in 2020, like doing a lot of voting stuff for young folks, or like, hey, we got to get people to vote. It's like, don't see it as a transactional thing. Like build a space where there's a conversation about what that means and how important their vote is. It's not just like, I want to like check the box that you registered, but like, let's have a conversation. Like, let's have a cookout. Let's have food involved so we can have a conversation.
Absolutely. Food definitely brings people together,
Yeah,
no matter
absolutely.
what occasion. I remember the first rally that I ever held in 2020, because I was like 19. And no other organizations in New York or like activist groups were doing kind of anything like for, you know, Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, it wasn't really like there were no Indigenous speakers that I found anywhere that I could go listen to. And I was like, oh, I know a few. Let me get them all together. So I did. I bought a megaphone. I called around to some of my friends. We got a good group of people to meet at Columbus Circle. And I was like, there'll be fry bread. Come eat food. But it was good. It was a good, and people, you know, after they listened to the speakers, we just all sat and ate, and I met new people, and it was great. Food, boom. As a youth, I could say I do love free food. um, but leads me into my next question. What are some of the things you guys have been working on now with youth organizing? Any new updates, fun, exciting, anything?
You all should check out the work that Move Texas is doing. I feel like serving on the board of a youth organization just has me in my auntie era. It's really cute. I'm like, ooh, we're like, look at what are the youth doing these days? Even though I'm not that far removed from it, like I want to be like I wanted to commit to an organization in my home state because as I'm moving around trying to chase tech dollars or whatever, I don't get to be at home as much as like I would like to be. And I still deeply care about the political potential and future of Texas. So I wanted to be involved. And so some of the cool stuff that we're doing at Move is like one, there's like an advocacy side that is like a C4, so they can do more cool stuff like bullying the state energy board because Texas keeps having these blackouts. And so they're doing this amazing like really creative organizing around like bullying the city energy board where they're like, why aren't there any climate activists on the people on the board? Why is it just a bunch of business people? Why are you raising electricity rates on people? And how about you like actually stick to your climate promises about like turning off these coal plants that are making the whole community sick? And then because Move is doing that kind of creative stuff, other cities in Texas are watching San Antonio and being like, oh, that's a blueprint. We can actually do that too. We can also bring in all these like clean energy, like these energy workers who also want like sick, clean energy jobs and like build a whole thing around the model that's being made in Texas. And then on like the student organizing side, there was a lot of like just scrambling to get young people to register to vote for many years because that's like the lowest hanging fruit on many fronts. But Move is like committed itself to building campus organizations that are sustainable, that are like self-sustaining, that are like much more local and culturally aligned with whatever school that they're organizing at. And there's just the depth and commitment and joy in the work that is happening. You know, like often I think scrappy youth organizers are like, oh, you know, you don't need like a entire organization and a board and a whole fundraising mechanism, like how chunky, you know, but oftentimes these sorts of apparatuses create sustainability and create like a discipline. And like when you write stuff down and you actually have meetings, like this is the kind of growth that I'm experiencing now as somebody who is like deeply interested in how change happens. Yes, I have my criticisms of like philanthropy and nonprofit industrial complex, but I also see oftentimes when you're deeply committed to the cause and the values, how like a good old organization, like running well with deeply committed smart people works. I love Move Texas.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that some of the cool things that are happening that I would love to share just a little bit about was, you know, I tell people that, you know, our age range at Youth FX is 10 to 25. They're like, you work with 10-year-olds? And I was like, yeah, we actually partnered with this local elementary school, and they have this thing called a student leadership team, but it's like these 15 like incredible young, you know, 10-year-olds who are thinking about things in the school that they want to see change in the community that they want to be changed. So we actually connected with their teacher, who's basically like their kind of like community outreach person for the elementary school, and we'd worked with her. She used to run an after school high school program that we were partnered with, and years ago. And so we kind of connected with her, and we started, you know, teaching documentary storytelling to these fifth graders. And it's just amazing, like how quickly they pick these things up. And like, so just an example, it's like, you know, telling a story about, you know, your library and how amazing the library is, but then saying, but we want more books about these things, and we want more diversity in the types of, you know, books that we have access to. And then thinking about like green spaces was a big thing they talked about in last year's series. And it's called the MAP project. And part of what they're trying to do is they're really trying to map out what is in the elementary school and then what is around in the community around them. And the thing that's so interesting is like where that school is located is in an area that is like heavily policed and has like also like services for, people who are homeless, and, it has people who are transitioning out of incarceration. And so there's all these like ways that that neighborhood has been really, really, kind of demonized, and they hear so much negativity about their neighborhood, and the students are trying to say, all these things about the school and the neighborhood that they love, but that they want to see change, and so again, it's like putting the kind of power into the hands of young people who are 10. Like I'm telling you, when you see a video where a 10-year-old is telling you what they want to see and what they love and what they want to change, you have this like visceral emotional response. And like, how can you ignore that? I mean, not only are they like super, super cute and precocious, but it's like they also are really saying really important things, and so that was a program that we created, partnership in 2 years ago, and we're about to do the third year of that. And then the other program that I really love is this project that we started 2 years ago called the History Reclamation Project. And that's teenagers connecting with elders in their community to hear their stories and also to learn about histories about the community that they didn't know. And so, like as an example, the one that we just completed last year was about the civil rights group that was called the Brothers, that was in Albany, but they were only in existence for 3 years before, through a lot of like, surveillance and interference from the police, they were kind of broken up. But what's so powerful about it is that the amount of, again, like that reciprocity happening there, where like the elders are like, oh my God, these young people want to hear our stories, and they feel so seen. And then young people who get to interact in a way with elders that they don't get to interact with in the community, because again, like there's these silos created, right? It's like teenagers are in school buildings and elders are in like nursing homes and like kind of like hidden away. And it's like, what if we brought them out into like actual space together? And then the amazing part about that program is like the screening then, and it's like the pride that each, the young people and the elders feel in, hearing their stories, but they're being the ones that are helping to kind of keep, again, this history preserved. That's really important that people don't know. And so we want to take that project to the next stage and do a lot of outreach with that, where, we want to get like markers in our community that talk about Black history that has never been talked about. And then I think about the ways that the young people who are in the program, they want to share that with their friends, because it's like all of a sudden history is not this thing that's just like this boring story that is really a lot of propaganda and a lot of white centered storytelling around what history is, but it's actually true to things that are happened in their own community that they can see, oh, that happened on that street in my neighborhood. And even like, taking it to like Out of the Muck, which is a documentary I made that traces like, the family history of my co-director, Ira McKinley. And in this town in Florida where there was this massive hurricane, and like it was a book that Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, bringing that history back to life. People in their own community did not know that story and didn't know the history of their town. And so those two projects specifically, the MAP project and Reclamation project, are really exciting to me, because again, I think it's about our young people in charge of the storytelling, and then therefore creating culture and preserving things that they feel are important for people to learn in the future.
That's amazing. How native of you. I feel like it's
Yeah.
that's the word I was looking for earlier, oral history. That's how things
Yes. Yeah.
are and were passed down. And I feel like specifically some of the traumas that we do carry as specifically Native Americans is that, when colonizers came up with boarding schools, it was the elders and the children that they came for. The children so they could brainwash them, cut them off from their culture, and the elders so they could stop teaching it. And so it's so amazing and so important, just not only for your community or my community, but for all communities, that we, reconnect with elders, but also connect with you. So that's great. And just last question before we wrap things up. So I am a senior at the School of Visual Arts now. I'm about to graduate, which makes me want to like tear my skin off, but also maybe a little excited. Do you guys have any advice for young filmmakers of color going into the industry and/or jobs that you would like to give a specific? We'll talk after.
Did you have something, Jessica?
No, I was deferring because I'm not a filmmaker.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know how your experience at SVA has been. I mean, I think the importance of school to me and higher education, like college, is really about the community building that can happen there, the potential for this group of, you know, folks who are post high school. You're not all of a sudden you're not being told what to do all the time. You have to figure out how to get, and you can organize. There's a lot of organizing obviously that happens on college campuses. And I don't mean necessarily even just political organizing. I mean artistic organizing. So like building collectives and like thinking about people that you kind of align with. You know, I always tell people was like, you know, like Barry Jenkins met his cinematographer and his producer that he still works with to this day at college. So it's like I think building relationships, but I don't think that has to happen only in college and that's the only space. The reason I say that is because you go into massive debt, you know, and it's like we were just talking today about like, you know, like Columbia MFAs. It's like you're going to be in debt like close to 200,000, if not more, $200,000. You have to pay for your own equipment. You have to pay for reels and or film reels and stock and things like that. And it's like I think that the idea of, you know, the kind of like academic industrial complex is just really like a problem because I feel like part of it is that we lack community spaces where people can get that. And I think I'm really about like how do we build more community spaces that are not monetary based. Like our programs for 16 years, every program has been free. As a matter of fact, we pay students who are doing production based programs. Like our summer program, everyone gets a stipend. Our history reclamation project, everyone gets a stipend. And so I think that, you know, college is great. Like there's a lot of great things about it, but I think it's really important to, you know, find a place that you can actually build community in. Because if you walk out of that with just a piece of paper and not a community and or some kind of networks or connections, then I think it was kind of like almost like a scam. You know what I mean? Because today it's like, you know, like you can learn so much about filmmaking from watching films and YouTube videos, and there's all sorts of websites that teach it. And the big thing that colleges offer you is access to equipment, access to people who are kind of experts or professionals, access to other students who can work with you. So it's like, what if there was a world where that was not, you know, going to cost you $60,000 a year? You know, so I think it's sort of like a, you know, like a really challenging space because we don't have a lot of places like that in most cities. So people like go to college, but I think that in a way, I think one thing I always remind people is like build your community in those spaces because people that you really vibe with and kind of can make art together at that stage of your life, often those people are going to be people you're going to work with together for a long time. And like, you know, I think, you know, Next Doc is another great example where it's like, it's a fellowship program and so many people that come to Next Doc, it's for 21 to 25-year-old folks. And like Ash was a fellow in 2019. And it's like, they are learning things even in those spaces that they never learned in college because all of a sudden it's also skill sharing and like peer-to-peer learning. Like you don't need to have like a professor teach you stuff. Like you can learn from each other, you know? So I think trying to figure out ways that can be fostered in those spaces, you know, and again, it's not to say that SVA doesn't have things to offer in those types of spaces, but I think it's really important for people to also ask for what they want and demand things of the university, you know, like not just settle for like the way that, oh, this is how it's done. Well, why is it done that way? Like I'm paying $60,000 to do this thing. Like I want access to all these other things that you're telling me I can't have access to because why does that rule exist or why does that structure exist where I can't have access to those things? Because these universities got endowments and they got a lot of money that they're just sitting on and building their own wealth for their own like, you know, purposes. So it's like, why? How do you access that? Like I think if you're in a college program as a senior, you should get money to make your projects. You shouldn't have to pay for anything. You know, I mean, you should be getting funded to do shit.
Can you say that again so I can send it to the
To your
Department of
professors.
Animation?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, and you know, it's interesting. Like animators, I think are some of the most, I think, like, you know, kind of underappreciated people in the industry because I feel like there's not a lot like animation is like a very kind of discrete field of film. And I think that like if you're in, for example, if you want to be a director, you can still be like all these other things before you get to that stage. But I think animation is really a very discrete and specific art form. But yeah, I think students, especially if they get to their senior years, like you should be getting funding to make your projects, like your senior thesis or capstone projects or whatever it's kind of phrased in whatever school setting. That should be a funded project. Like you should be able to access funds from the universities. Because again, go check the endowment. You know, I remember doing a screening at Vassar College and the students were talking about, you know, all these different things around divestment at that time was a really big thing that university students were fighting for. And I remember the number, it was like a 20-something $7 billion endowment. Meanwhile, you know, you're living, the university is like walled off from one of the most, you know, kind of under-resourced, marginalized communities in upstate New York, Poughkeepsie, and you're sitting on a $27 billion endowment and students on top of that are paying 60 to 80,000 dollars a year to go to school there. So it's like, to me, it doesn't add up. Like there's some kind of a scheme going on that's not adding up. So, and on top of that, as a student, you should not have to pay anything like, like the lab fees and stuff like that. No, you should be getting money and access money and resources to do your work so that you can say, look, I come out of my university with a reel, with a project, with a website, with all these things under my belt. So I'm ready to go into the professional world as an artist. And I'm equipped with those things, not in debt, severely in debt. Like that's just like, it's like you're starting from, like this like at the back of the line, and you got to kind of just get to the front at some point. And what's that going to take? 10 years, 20 years or something? And sometimes never. People are never getting out of student debt. And so that's to me, it's a travesty that exists in our university and higher education systems.
It is.
If I've taken
Sorry, university
anything,
professors, if you're out there. You're not the
if I've
problem,
taken
it's the university.
anything from working with tech bros, it's the audacity that tech bros have of being like, everything is solvable, everything is hackable, there's a workaround. What is this like age-old institution? We're going to go around it, we're going to build around it, we're going to do what we want, we're going to invent a future. And as much as I hate to say it, I think it actually works on many fronts. Is just if you're constantly like trying to think smarter rather than harder, working around institutions rather than trying to work through them. I have a violin degree. Like I shouldn't be working in tech right now, but I schemed my way in because I'm clever and I'm constantly scheming. And so I think there's a scheme for everything. I think everything is figure outable. And I think that's like the most important thing that you can take away from you once you're out of college. Like I spent a lot of time trying to understand what the structures of how power work and how the levers work and how people make things change. And I'm like, oh, that's what white people do. That's how it works. That's how you open doors for yourself. Oh, you fundraise your stuff. How do you ask for money? Like there's a bunch of stuff that you feel like you have to learn before you even start. But honestly, with a little bit of scheming energy and resilience, you can go a long way.
I will be keeping that in mind. Well, that's all the questions I have for today. Thank you guys so much for the wonderful advice and your giving me your time and your storytelling and the work that you do for your community. It, especially as a youth organizer or a college student, it was amazing to hear from you guys because you guys just do such amazing work for your communities, and I'm just fangirling at this point. But yeah, that's all the questions I have right now. Ash, you want to take it from here?
Well, thank you for your awesome facilitation. And also, if you have a website with your stuff, you should drop that in there, or like Instagram, because
yes,
folks are always looking for animators.
hit my line.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Bowen, Kalani, Jessica, for sharing today. It was a really dope conversation. Again, it will be recorded and it will be on the ADOC YouTube, so it can be revisited and shared with anybody you think would be interested in this. Sign up for ADOC's newsletter, join us on Slack, follow us on Instagram, and the link to everybody's websites is in the chat, as well as links to RSVP for our following sessions. So yeah, I'm gonna let everybody go. Thank you for being here. Appreciate everybody's time. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.